Just a few hours before his death, Paul Lynde, the comedian once hailed as the sharpest wit in America, was found lifeless in his luxurious Beverly Hills mansion. Before that moment, he had left behind a voicemail message that had never been made public. That recording lasted only 11 seconds. In it, Paul's voice trembled slightly as though he had been drinking, forcing out what sounded like his final confession. "I'm sorry for hiding that letter. They will never forgive me. And he will never know how deeply I loved him. No one has ever been certain who he was." But those closest to Paul understood that it was the fragment of truth he had kept buried for his entire life. So in the end, who was the man that caused Paul Lynde such anguish and torment? And why did Paul believe that if the letter were ever revealed, he would never, ever be forgiven? All of those secrets will finally be unveiled in today's video. From 1966 to 1980, Paul Lynde was entangled in at least 5 scandals involving same-sex affairs. What was strange, however, was that not a single newspaper reported on them, nor did any public criticism appear, even though in that era, just one such incident could have been enough to destroy the career of any artist. But Paul was different. He was not an ordinary entertainer. He was ABC's golden goose, the shining star of a television age when a single well-timed laugh could generate millions of dollars in advertising revenue. For that reason, behind Paul stood an entire system of power operating like a cold, calculated machine that would stop at nothing to bury the truth. One of the most shocking incidents that nearly came to light happened at the end of 1966 in Salt Lake City. That night, Paul was spotted in a small gay bar tucked away in the heart of downtown. According to an internal police document later leaked from city authorities, Paul was seen behaving intimately with a 19-year-old college student named Mark D. Weller. Some patrons in the bar voiced their disapproval, and one even called the police. Yet within just 30 minutes, the entire matter disappeared mysteriously, as if it had never taken place. The speed with which it was erased was deeply unsettling. A bartender who later spoke on condition of anonymity recalled that the same night a man in a suit approached him and issued a chilling warning. "Keep your mouth shut if you don't want to lose your job and be forced out of this city forever." Paul's manager, George Reiger, not only sent $5,000 in cash to the Salt Lake Tribune newsroom, but went further, gifting the editor-in-chief a 2-week vacation in Hawaii, along with the promise of an exclusive ABC advertising contract if you agree to cooperate. Another source revealed that ABC's lawyers even threatened to withdraw all local television advertising funds should the story make it to the front page. What made the story even more disturbing was the rumor of a photograph showing Paul and Mark holding hands outside the bar captured by a local crew member. That photo has never surfaced publicly. It vanished within mere hours immediately after ABC's legal department intervened. It was said that the original camera was confiscated and the crew member abruptly dismissed without explanation. In a handwritten letter to a former schoolmate in Ohio, Paul once confessed in trembling words, "I just want to sit beside someone who makes me feel safe. No demands, no touching, just sitting quietly. But the way they look at me, it's like I'm some kind of disease. I don't know how much longer I can keep wearing this mask." 12 years later, an even more serious incident occurred in Palm Springs. In July 1978, Paul hosted a private party in a lavish villa that once belonged to Errol Flynn, the Hollywood legend infamous for his extravagant and secretive gatherings. Among the guests that night was a 21-year-old theater student named Peter Casper, who was studying at Cal State Fullerton. Around midnight, Peter fell from a second-floor balcony onto the stone courtyard below, dying instantly. Police swiftly ruled it a drunken accident, but numerous details raised suspicions. A shattered glass stained with blood was discovered several meters from the body. The balcony railing showed scratches consistent with a struggle. Even more suspicious, the coroner had filed a request for a deeper investigation, but the document was annulled within just 12 hours with no reason provided. Veteran CBS journalist Mike Wallace pursued the case. In an internal report, he noted the scene was cleaned within an hour of the fall. Police did not photograph the body, and not a single witness was willing to speak. As for Paul Lynde, he refused to make any public appearances for the following 6 months. A few weeks later, ABC received an anonymous letter from a religious organization known as one of its largest financial backers. The letter demanded that ABC terminate its association with artists whose private lives deviate from American family values or risk losing its funding. Paul subsequently vanished from television for nearly half a year. When he finally reappeared, his eyes were sunken, his laughter sounded choked, and he never again dared to mention anything about his private life. A former backstage assistant of Paul's at ABC later recalled, "He told me once that if anyone ever caught a picture of him holding the hand of the person he loved, even for a single moment, his career would have its plug pulled the very next day. The TV shows, the ads, the contracts, even the friendships, everything would vanish like foam on water." And then, in the midst of those long years of living in fear, silently enduring, as if condemned simply for daring to be himself, Paul Lynde met Bing Davidson. A young man, wild yet warm, the first person who made him believe that maybe just once in his life he could truly live with his heart uncovered. But at the very moment, Paul began to dream of freedom. Tragedy quietly laid its cold hand on his shoulder and pushed him straight into an abyss with no way back. In 1965, Paul Lynde was standing at the pinnacle of fame. He had just received a Tony Award nomination for his role in Bye Bye Birdie, and at the same time, ABC had invited him to develop his own sitcom tentatively titled Sedgwick Hawkstyle's Prince of Danger. Everything seemed to be within his grasp until Bing Davidson walked into his life. At that time, Bing was only 24 years old, an unfamiliar face to the public who had barely managed to land a supporting role in The Brass Bottle alongside Barbara Eden. He carried dreamy eyes, a high-bridged nose, refined cheekbones, reminiscent of a young Marlon Brando, and the unbothered stride of someone who had never learned how to fear the world. Perhaps it was precisely his indifference toward Hollywood's rigid rules that pulled Paul in as though under an unbreakable spell. In the entertainment world, no one dared to say for certain what Paul and Bing truly were to each other. They never held hands in public, no shared photographs, no captions tying their names together. Yet the staff at the Beverly Hilton had witnessed them entering the same suite together on many consecutive nights. A bartender once candidly remarked, "They didn't look like friends. They looked like two people both wildly in love and terrified of being caught. They never let go of each other, but every time they stepped into the hallway, they nervously glanced around as if paparazzi were hiding under the bed." Even if the relationship had never been given a name for Paul, it meant everything. He believed that maybe for the first time in his life, he could finally remove the mask he had worn for so long. At the end of November that year, they traveled together to San Francisco for a weekend getaway at the Sir Francis Drake Hotel, a 21-story historic building on Powell Street. They checked into room 816. In less than 2 hours, they had ordered 3 bottles of hard liquor. And then, at around 2 o'clock in the morning, a chilling sound tore through the night, awakening the entire hotel, the sharp crash of shattering glass. Bing Davidson was found lying motionless on the glass roof of the ground floor restaurant, his body twisted, blood soaking half his face. The police arrived within 10 minutes. The window of room 816 remained wide open. Inside, Paul Lynde sat silently in the dark, a glass of liquor in his hand, his eyes bloodshot, but he said nothing. There was no suicide note, no sign of a struggle. The police swiftly concluded an accident caused by drunken imbalance. But the truth, if it ever existed, was buried that very night. A housekeeper who wished to remain anonymous later told the local press before being forced to retract the statement there were scratch marks on the armrest of the chair by the window, and there was a long scratch on Bing's wrist, that the autopsy report completely ignored. NBC reporter Connie Chung, who was at the scene the following morning, noted that the police initially suspected there were signs of a minor altercation. Yet only hours later, the entire case file was transferred directly to ABC's legal office. 3 days after the official conclusion was released, no evidence of foul play. An internal NBC source later revealed, there was a security tape showing Paul and Bing entering the hotel together, holding hands, laughing as they walked. But that tape disappeared immediately after ABC's lawyers visited the police department. And that was only the tip of the iceberg. According to a leaked internal fax from ABC's advertising division, a religious organization, one of the network's biggest sponsors, donating millions for primetime slots, had sent a letter demanding that the station reconsider any programming involving individuals whose lifestyles conflict with the moral standards of national television. That letter was stamped only 7 days after Bing Davidson's death. Immediately, ABC canceled the Prince of Danger sitcom. Producers turned their backs. A major advertising contract collapsed, citing negative feedback from traditional female audiences as the reason. And Paul, he vanished silent like a ghost. For nearly a year afterward, close friends recalled that he refused to step outside unless he covered his face with a wide-brimmed hat and dark glasses. Each morning he drank vodka instead of water, consuming nothing but ice cubes. Each night he wandered aimlessly through his mansion, turning all the lights on and then off again without uttering a single word. An ABC staff member once remembered that during one drunken episode on set, Paul whispered softly, "I didn't just lose a man. I lost the entire world I once dreamed of living in." Do you think I can mourn the one I loved when even the name of that relationship is something I'm never allowed to speak? Since that horrifying night in San Francisco, Paul Lynde was never the same again. He was no longer the free-spirited comedian who once dominated the stage, but rather a man who survived on laughter while living in fear of his own true emotions. He became like an actor trapped in a single, unending role, the role of being merely the close friend of his own lover. In the 1970s, as Hollywood was being shaken by political upheaval, the fight for sexual freedom, and the backlash of the press, Paul quietly purchased a luxurious mansion in Beverly Hills. That house had once belonged to Errol Flynn, the legendary star of the 1940s, whispered about in tabloids for his all-male parties and champagne that flowed like rivers. The mansion, adorned with an iron gate sculpted with eagles, Italian marble floors, and a heart-shaped swimming pool, was not only a symbol of extravagance, but also transformed into Paul's private fortress, a secluded kingdom he built for himself. Yet the real change in his life did not come from marble floors or moonlight spilling across the balcony each night. It came in the form of the man who moved in to live with him, Stan Feinesmith. Stan was not an actor, not a director, and not a manager. He was simply a Jewish hairdresser who had cut hair for dancers and television actors at a small salon on Melrose Avenue. Paul met him on a spring afternoon in 1968 when he casually walked in for a haircut just for fun. Somehow they ended up talking for over 3 hours straight about nothing more than cactus plants in Arizona without taking their eyes off one another. From that day forward, they became inseparable. No one in the industry dared to speak openly about their relationship. Yet from the moment Stan moved in, Paul's mansion was no longer just his house, it became a stronghold for a forbidden love. They raised 2 Pomeranian dogs named Tinker and Belle. They chose deep crimson velvet curtains for the dining room, placed a white piano beneath the crystal chandelier, and Stan personally hired an architect to redesign the garden so that the moonlight would fall directly onto Paul's pillow every night. In 1976, People magazine came for an interview. A photo was taken beside the pool. Paul smiling gently, holding Tinker in his arms, while Stan stood behind a glass window, his gaze drifting into the distance, unlabeled, unnamed. In the article, he was described only as roommate and longtime friend. Nothing more, nothing less. Because in those years, if anyone dared to use the word partner, Paul's career would have gone up in flames immediately. A former ABC editor once recalled Stan was the only one who allowed Paul to take off his mask. But he was also the very person Paul had to hide most carefully. Stan had saved Paul from scandal more than 3 times. Once in Las Vegas, when Paul threw a drink in the face of a hotel clerk simply because the man referred to Stan as your friend instead of your assistant. Another time when Paul was so drunk he collapsed in the hallway of the Bel Air Hotel. Stan, wrapped in a robe, stooped down, carried him like a child, and got him safely back to the room before the paparazzi arrived. Director William Asher, who had worked with Paul on Bewitched, once asked quietly, "Backstage, why do you keep calling Stan your friend?" "It's obvious he isn't." Paul was silent for a long time, then finally whispered in a broken voice, "Do you think I like lying about Stan? I hate the way I have to play the role of a best friend. But if I told the truth, everything would be over. Not just for me, for him too." For 2 decades, Stan never once demanded recognition. He never went on television, never attended events, never gave statements. Yet his name appeared on every important document of Paul's life, from flight tickets and insurance forms to even the draft of his will. Within the industry, it was whispered that Stan was the only person who knew all of Paul's secrets. The behind-the-scenes tapes that had been burned, the love letters written and then torn apart before anyone could read them, and even a photograph taken during a late-night party with 2 young male dancers, a photo that disappeared after a single call from ABC's legal office. There was even a rumor that a photographer once captured Paul and Stan holding hands during a trip to Hawaii in 1974. But before the picture could make it to print, the magazine's managing editor received an anonymous warning. "If you want to keep your advertising contracts with ABC and the church network sponsors, you had better bury that photo where no one will ever find it." Even eyewitnesses were not spared from threats. A bartender at the Four Seasons Hotel recalled that after he casually told a local reporter that Stan and Paul acted just like a married couple, a stranger came to him that very night with a chilling warning. "If you ever utter another word, don't expect your family to remain safe." By 1980, Stan had tried to persuade Paul to leave Hollywood altogether. They could move to Vancouver, a place where no one knew their names. They could raise dogs, plant tomatoes, open a barber shop, and live out the rest of their days as 2 eccentric old men. But Paul shook his head. He replied, "If I walk away from the spotlight, I will vanish. I'm not a man, I am a role, and that role has to stay on stage until it falls." Bitterly, the man who loved him most was also the one who could not be by his side in the final moments of his life. And in a bitter twist of fate, the very first person to step into the cold bedroom where Paul Lynde drew his final breath was not Stan Feinesmith, the man who had loved him deeply and stayed by his side for nearly 2 decades. Instead, it was 2 other men, both carrying murky pasts and entangled connections so ambiguous that even to this day, many believe they were the final link in the chain of tragedies that swallowed Paul Lynde whole. The first was Dean Dittman, a name that might seem unremarkable to most. Yet for Paul, Dean was an indelible part of his memory. The two had studied together at Northwestern University in the early 1950s, back when they were still devoted to the stage long before Hollywood consumed their lives. They acted side by side in student plays, but their bond extended far beyond the theater lights. A former costume assistant who once worked for ABC recalled, in 1957 they lived together for several months, shared a room, shared a bed, and had far more than just late-night rehearsal sessions. After vanishing from Paul's life for many years, Dean unexpectedly resurfaced in the mid-1970s. He was seen slipping in and out of the Beverly Hills mansion at midnight on multiple occasions. Once paparazzi caught him and Paul sitting in a car, Dean's hand resting on Paul's thigh. But when questioned, Paul simply offered a faint smile, his eyes drifting off, and muttered curtly, "Dean is an old friend." A former assistant added Dean was the only person allowed to open Paul's bedroom door without knocking. That alone speaks volumes. The second man bore a name of an entirely different nature, Paul Baresi. To Hollywood, he was known as a sweet nightmare. With his muscular build, icy demeanor, and scandalous past, Baresi had once been a porn actor, a semi-nude model, and most infamously a fixer, the man celebrities turned to when their sexual scandals needed to vanish. He had successfully buried the affair between a major action star and a 17-year-old male assistant, and he had neatly disposed of a compromising audio tape between an Oscar-winning actress and her ex-girlfriend just days before a film premiere. With Paul Lynde, however, the nature of their relationship was never clearly defined. Rumors swirled that Baresi was nothing more than a paid one-night stand. Others insisted they were close friends who had weathered blackmail threats together. A former bartender at the gay club Studio One recounted, "I saw Baresi drag Paul out barehanded after a paparazzo cornered him in the parking lot. Baresi punched the guy so hard he broke his teeth. Paul just stood frozen, trembling like a child." In 1980, a photograph of the two men wearing shorts and dark sunglasses strolling down Fire Island Beach sparked outrage inside ABC. In the picture, Paul was beaming while Baresi casually slipped his hand into Paul's pocket as if they were an undeniable couple. The photo never surfaced publicly. It disappeared from the editorial office a single day after it was delivered. On January 11, 1982, Paul had gone silent for 3 full days. No phone calls answered, no doors opened, no one saw him leave his house. It was Dean Dittman and Paul Baresi who broke into the North Doheny Drive mansion to check on him. Yet one detail remained hidden for years. Baresi had actually arrived almost an hour before Dean. And what they saw that night would forever be seared into memory. Paul Lynde lay face down on his bed, completely naked, one hand resting loosely near his pillow beside a half-empty bottle of vodka. The cassette player was softly playing Olivia Newton-John's "I Honestly Love You." A pale yellow glow from the bedside lamp fell upon an old framed photo Paul and Stan embracing during a vacation in Maui. The window stood slightly ajar. Outside, a dove perched quietly on the ledge, and beneath the bed was Tinker, the little dog who never left his master's side. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, no suicide note. Yet, according to one anonymous investigator, the room looked as if it had been cleaned before the police arrived. The Beverly Hills police chief denied this. However, a reporter for Hollywood Confidential claimed an inside source had told him something had been burned in the fireplace. The ashes were still warm. The official conclusion from the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office stated sudden death caused by heart failure complicated by alcohol and prescription drugs. But the media was not so easily convinced. The National Enquirer blared the headline, "Paul Lynde, Did He Die of Betrayal?" An anonymous source revealed that just days earlier, Paul had a furious argument with an older silver-haired man. A bartender at Raven's Echo recalled, "I heard him screaming, 'I love you. You know that, why are you doing this to me?' before smashing a glass on the floor." There were also whispers that Paul had taken a kind of pleasure-enhancing drug secretly passed around among the Fire Island crowd, a cocktail of amyl nitrate mixed with a specially crafted hormone. No one confirmed it, yet no one outright denied it either. One theory went even further, that Baresi arriving before Dean had cleaned up all the sensitive evidence, love letters, photographs, even a cassette tape from Paul's study before calling Dean and the police. In his only interview with Vanity Fair in 1990, Baresi offered nothing more than this: "Paul died alone, but the rumors will never let him rest, not even deep in the ground." And indeed, that was true. The death of Paul Lynde was not just the loss of a comedian. It marked the quiet collapse of an entire era, an age where men were forbidden from loving openly, where every smile was a mask, and where sometimes secrets could kill long before a heart ever stopped beating. What breaks the heart most is not the way Paul Lynde left this world, but the fact that throughout his entire life, he never once had the chance to live truly as himself, not even after the stage lights had gone dark. That silence itself became the cruelest sentence Hollywood ever imposed on a man who only longed to be loved. And that was also the moment when his story reached its final chapter, a chapter stripped of laughter, filled only with shadows, oblivion, and dreams of love forever stolen away. There was no grand funeral, no official memorial service held by ABC, the very network that had broadcast hundreds of hours of his laughter. Not a single candle was lit on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. At the Hollywood Bowl, not even one wreath was laid in his honor. Everything grew quiet, chillingly cold, as if Paul Lynde had never even existed at all. A former television colleague speaking in drunken sorrow once exclaimed, "Hollywood laughed with him for 30 years." But it took them only 3 minutes to turn their backs once he was gone. Paul's estate, ranging from his lavish Beverly Hills mansion to his stakes in several hit television projects, to his share of international syndication profits, was quietly divided through a brief and understated will. The majority was left to the Los Angeles Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, an organization he had secretly donated to for more than a decade. The rest went to a handful of distant cousins on his mother's side, relatives who had never once appeared at his bedside. And Stan Feinesmith, the silent companion who had stood by Paul's side for nearly 14 years, received nothing at all. When people began to question why a former assistant who had been with Paul during his final years shared a single chilling line, he told me, "If Stan's name appears in the will, then everything will be exposed. I cannot allow Stan to be smeared. I would rather die than see the man I love dragged into the mud." And so, Paul struck out the name of the man he loved most, to shield him even as he prepared for his own departure. When Paul died, the media shed not a single tear. They repeated the same hollow lines. Paul Lynde, famous comedian, passes away at the age of 55. No one dared to write that he was a gay man. No one dared to acknowledge that he had ever loved other men. Not a single report mentioned Stan. And no one asked the obvious question, how could a man who had brought laughter to millions die utterly alone, naked on a cold and empty bed? A local news outlet in Palm Springs even wrote with biting cruelty, "He lived strangely and died in silence like a clown who lost his stage." A thinly veiled insult, sharp and merciless. Men like Paul in that era had only two choices: live a lie in order to be accepted, or live the truth and be cast out. Bruce Vilanch, the veteran Oscar writer, once choked up during an appearance on Inside the Actors Studio in 1995, and said, "If Paul had been born in our time, he would have been an LGBTQ icon. He would be invited to sit as a judge on RuPaul's Drag Race, grace the cover of Out magazine, and crack jokes about gay love on television without the slightest fear." But sadly, he was born in the wrong era. In Paul's time, loving the wrong person was enough to destroy an entire life. And Paul was far from the only one. An entire generation of gay stars in Hollywood back then lived trapped inside glass cages. By day, they posed as elegant gentlemen on the red carpet. By night, they became fugitives in dimly lit bars, stealing a moment to hold the hand of the one they loved while darting nervous glances at every shadow. They staged sham marriages with female co-stars, signed secretive love contracts bound by strict confidentiality clauses, and if they ever happened to truly fall in love, that love had to be locked away in a drawer, together with letters that would never be sent. One media investigator once revealed there was a covert team hired by major studios whose sole job was to track, seize, and destroy any material that might expose a star's private life. They once paid $25,000 just to purchase and burn one of Paul's journals. Only a single line remained scribbled hastily inside a small leather notebook discovered in the drawer of his bedside table. I once dreamed of walking hand in hand with the man I love in broad daylight. But that dream was never meant for me. It belongs to someone born after me. And he had been right. Today, names like Neil Patrick Harris, Jim Parsons, Ellen DeGeneres can hold hands with the ones they love openly on the red carpet, host weddings, broadcast live on television, win awards, and thank my husband without fear of boycott. But to reach this moment, there had to be an entire generation buried in silence. They were stars forced to fade into the background. They were lovers who could not speak their love aloud. They were hearts bound tightly within the glittering shell of laughter fame and contracts of silence. And Paul Lynde was one of them. So, every time you watch a clip of Hollywood Squares when he cracks a joke, bats his eyes, or mocks himself with a caustic tone, remember this: behind every smile was a tear swallowed back into his heart. Remember, there was once a man who dared to love. But his love was only permitted to exist in the shadows, and when he left this world, he carried with him an entire dream, a dream that a whole generation of gay men of his time never dared to touch. That is the greatest tragedy of all. But the tragedy of Paul Lynde did not end in that cold bedroom in 1982. It continued to echo in the memories of friends, colleagues, and the countless audiences who once adored him. For many years afterward, whenever Paul Lynde's name was mentioned, people only recalled the biting one-liners, the sharp-witted comedian on Hollywood Squares. The real man behind the jokes, the one carrying wounds that were never given a name, was slowly covered in the dust of oblivion. Hollywood, like a massive machine, kept turning relentlessly. New faces stepped into the spotlight. New laughter filled the screens, and the silence surrounding Paul became its own kind of unwritten law. In the years that followed, even during television, specials meant to honor the past, he would appear only for a fleeting few seconds, just a blink on the screen before vanishing again, as though the entertainment industry itself wanted to avoid the uncomfortable truth that they had once abandoned an artist to die in loneliness. And yet, behind the cold headlines and the buried files, Paul Lynde still lived on in the memories of those who had truly known him. One former colleague recalled that at times backstage, Paul would gaze into the darkened space at the back of the theater and whisper, "Is there someone out there who understands me? Or are they all just laughing at this performance?" It was a question he never received an answer to. Today, as the world has changed, as members of the LGBTQ community are allowed to live more openly and honestly, Paul Lynde's legacy is no longer just laughter. It stands as a painful reminder that behind the glitter of fame there are souls left abandoned. There are dreams of love that were never acknowledged, and that every radiant smile on the screen can sometimes be nothing more than a fragile mask concealing a heart that was quietly bleeding. And so, the life of Paul Lynde came to a close, in a silence so haunting it still lingers. Yet what he left behind continues to echo somewhere woven between the bursts of raucous laughter and the chilling pauses of Hollywood. He was once a man who could make all of America laugh, and yet, in a cruel twist of fate, he was never given the chance to cry for his own destiny. What do you think about the tragedy of Paul Lynde? If he had been born into a more tolerant and open era, could his life have unfolded differently? And how many other stars were there, those who were forced to love in the shadows, only to fade away quietly, with no one ever daring to speak their names out loud? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the hidden, shocking, and never-before-told stories from behind Hollywood's glittering curtain.